Anna from Savvy Cat Realty speaking to you today about frauds in the real estate market of Portugal. I'm going to go over both things to be aware of in rentals and when buying. The first thing that obviously overlaps on both is, thank you, Carrie. The first thing that obviously overlap on both is don't make payments before you have contracts. And that's obviously a base rule in most cases. So things that can be a problem in the real estate market, the buying market in Portugal. Like I said, once again, it's very unregulated. Okay, so Sarah is asking if it is illegal or legal to refuse pets. That is a very good question. It actually is technically legal. It's not exactly to refuse pets. What happens is the landlord can choose not to allow pets in their house. And it's also, it can also be, for example, a condominium policy. I believe what we call condominium ends up being similar to what you call homeowner association in America, although here in Portugal it only applies to buildings. Like who owns apartments in the same building, they come together and make a condominium. A condominium is sets some rules and makes the general payments, like for elevator and cleaning and that kind of thing. It's actually usually the condominium is supposed to be the responsibility of the owner, not the renter. However, if it's on the contract that it says the responsibility of the renter to pay the tenant, then it stands. What is written on the contract stands. So, is it illegal to refuse pets? No, it's not illegal. The owners can choose not to allow pets on their house, and it's a big problem, especially on apartments. There was an attempt to pass a law in order to classify that as discrimination and make it illegal. But in the end, even if they do make it illegal, what happens is the owner of the house can just choose not to make a contract with you. And as long as they have other people that fit their criteria, then, they probably will go with them. Truth is, what a lot of people do is that if it's a small pet, they don't tell the landlord. They can't exactly kick you out for that, but it can bring you problems for the relationship, and the landlord can still choose to terminate within the legal terms of the contract. So yes, pets can be a problem in the Portuguese market because, a lot of people, it's hard to find rentals that accept pets, but it's not impossible. So, back into the buying market. Like I was saying, things are very unregulated here, and a lot of things that would be considered illegal in America happen with some frequency here. So, one of them is that it's very, very common for people to list things that aren't really ready to be sold. And this is something that we are constantly having problems with. And things like, one that happened recently was, it was a couple, they were married, and the husband listed the property for sale, but didn't inform the wife. And when one of my clients wanted to buy the property and he informed the wife that he would be selling it because he legally had to, as they were married in conjunction of goods, the wife refused to sell the property. And in the end, we couldn't do anything about it because they are the owners. What happens is that property shouldn't have gone into the market in the first place. And this is unfortunately common here in Portugal, as most agents and agencies don't do the due diligence before they list things on the market. So this brings us to a lot of things that can happen because of this. One of them is illegal construction. Very, very, very common, illegal pools. This same property that the owners weren't in agreement with sell also had an illegal pool. It was next to a nature reserve, and there is a few laws about construction next to the rental reserve. Actually, that property would be illegal if it wasn't built just before the new laws applied. So it's no longer legal to construct around that area. But because the construction permission was emitted before the new laws, it was legal. However, the pool was constructed after and not according to the regulations. So the pool was illegal by 100 meters. It was really, yeah. So people don't make their due diligences, and that can be quite problematic. In this case, it would be impossible to legalize this pool because it wasn't within the limits according to the nature reserve. So basically, if my clients ended up buying that property, they would have to demolish the pool and build a new one if they wanted. So this is something that can be a very, very common problem. I think this ends up being one of the biggest frauds in the real estate market, is just omission in information and lack of due diligence when it comes to verifying things. So this can apply to illegal construction, more than illegal. Sometimes it's fully illegal construction, like the land is still registered as a rural land and someone just built their house, and that house is fully illegal, and sometimes it's not even possible to legalize it. So that's something to be very careful about. Another thing is just extensions. That happens quite often. Like the official property, let's say it's a 2-bedroom townhouse, but the owners expanded it to make it a 4-bedroom townhouse and made it bigger and so on. But they did all that alterations illegally. So they didn't declare anything to town hall and they didn't license anything in town hall. So technically the whole property is now illegal because it no longer corresponds to what was registered in town hall. And sometimes it is possible to register these alterations and legalize the property, but it's usually a very, very complicated process, and more often than not, it will not be possible. So this is something you have to be very, very careful of, and it's always very important to have a lawyer involved. Even if you decide you want to do the whole property search and purchase alone, always hire a lawyer. We work with a lawyer, and all the transactions that go through our company go through a lawyer, both rentals and purchases, because it's very important to us to make sure everything is correct. But if you want to do things on your own, make sure you hire a lawyer and verify things. Worst case scenario, you will be paying them and they will just tell you that everything is okay. But if everything is not okay, they will be saving you a lot of money. And honestly, lawyers in Portugal aren't that expensive. So, another thing to be aware of that also covers on the lawyer part is debts and mortgages. There is a law in Portugal that the debts regarding a property pass along to its owner. So if you are sold a property that has debt and mortgage associated to it, you can, when you buy that property, you end up inheriting that debt too. So it's very important to make sure that everything is liquidated before the transaction happens. And that is also something that we always verify before any transaction happens. There is only legal professionals can do this, but there is a portal where you can enter the information of the property and verify if they have any debts or collections associated. And this includes mortgages. When it's mortgages, usually just the bank participates in the transaction, and they just go there and confirm that the mortgage have been terminated. So that's something that you will also often see when you buy a property that had a mortgage on it. There will be an agent of the bank present at the deed because of this. So on that topic too, another thing to be very careful of, this applies mostly to investors, is buying property that is rented. You will see often ads for property saying, okay, so I'm selling these, but it still comes with tenants. What happens is old contracts are very, very, very hard to terminate. And I can tell you by experience, because my family owns a lot of property that comes back from my great-grandfather. And some of the contracts we have were still made by them. And it's basically impossible to terminate those contracts. So you will be inheriting a problem unless you have an agreement present beforehand. I actually just went through this experience with another client. He actually bought a property from my family, and I did speak to the tenant previously and drafted an agreement with him. And this was my fault because he agreed with me verbally, but I was naive enough to not request things in writing. And then when the buyer actually came, he decided to ask for a lot more money. So we had to go back and forth with this. In the end, we still reached an agreement and the sale is still going through. But this agreement was made prior to the transaction happening because, like I said, we like to make sure everything is done right. So be very careful with situations with tenants. In this case, if the tenant did not agree to in this case it was a settlement, if he did not agree to it, it would be very, very hard to kick him out. It would basically take 3 to 5 years in court. So it is a very complicated situation. So be very careful with properties with tenants. Another thing to be aware of, and this applies mostly to properties that are in auction. There are a few auctions both from the public and banks and credit agencies and that kind of thing. So there are a few auction portals that sell property. And you have to be very, very careful when using this kind of thing, because more often than not, it's not the whole property, it's just a part. So what happens here in Portugal very often is that the property is inherited and it passes down, and in the end, like 10 people own it. And what sometimes happen in this kind of situations of that, where they start taking the property as form of payments, is that they put up for sale just the part of that person that is in debt of the property. So it won't be the whole property. It will be, I don't know, half of the property, a fourth of the property, a sixth of the property. So this is something to be very careful with, because in auctions, more often than not, it's not the whole thing. It's just a part of that property. We also look in this kind of websites for our clients, mostly investor clients. Do be aware that in most cases for this kind of auction is usually properties that aren't in very good state. It's very rare to appear new things. Sometimes they do for like contractors and constructions and so on. A lot of unfinished things also show up. That's actually a good thing to go into now. It's to buy property before they are finished. So this is not a scam, but it's something that you should be very careful with, because if you buy a property in project, obviously it will be the advantage, and they always make a much lower price to make it appealing. But it's a big risk for two reasons. One is they usually never keep up with their timelines. Be prepared, because I don't know, 70% of the times it will take longer than what they promised you. And the other thing is, if the company opens bankruptcy, you just lose your money and you can't get it back. So it's a risk. It's important to do those kinds of things with reputable companies. It can be a good deal, yes, if you are willing to wait and if you make sure that the company is safe. but it's something that you have to be very careful with when dealing. So let me see what else I have here at my list. I already went over illegal construction, illegal extensions, debt and mortgages, sales of parts, tenants, and what I missed was buying companies for the property. Oh, that's a very good thing that one of my agents just posted here. Sometimes they show 3D image on real estate websites. That's very true. So that's one of the things that would be a fraud in America, but isn't in Portugal. It's debatable, but what a lot of people do is that they advertise the apartments with just beautiful 3D images that sometimes just look real, and more often than not, the building isn't even finished. So that's something you need to be rather careful of. And it does happen a lot. So misleading advertisements. And once again, you have to be very careful and look into the companies if you are considering buying something that is not finished yet. So I was going to go into buying properties through companies. This is very problematic. I've seen the same listing for 2 years. Is it even real? That's actually not uncommon at all in Portugal. The Portuguese market, rental. Okay, for rental, it likely is a fraud because the rental market is quite fast-paced, and I don't think anything would last in the without being rented for 2 years unless it was like a complete bad deal, which would end up being a fraud. However, if it's a buying thing, it's not that unusual. We use an MLS-like program that gives us access to the whole market and all the official agent listings. And basically, it covers 300-something websites. Of course, it doesn't cover every single agency, but it covers the bigger chunk of the market. And one of the things that we are able to access in this software is how long things have been on the market and how often they have been put off and on. So one of the things that often happens is that in the real estate market, the buying market in Portugal, most of the agencies don't have exclusivity. So the same property can be listed by multiple agents in agencies, which kind of generates a mess. I have a whole video just criticizing that. You can go and check that. I'm not going to go into that, so I won't shut up. But I was saying, because of that program, we are able to check how long the property has been in the market. And it's very, very common to see things that's 300, 600 days in the market. And people in Portugal are very relaxed, so they just leave it be. And one of the things is also exactly the way the agencies operate. So unless it's in a very high demand area when things tend to move faster, in lower demand areas, it's very common for things to just stay there for a very long time. And another thing that sometimes happens is that they get a buyer, they start negotiations, they take it off the market, and then for some reason the deal falls through and they revive the listing. So that happens sometimes too, and it doesn't exactly mean it's a fraud. That can happen with the rentals, although I think it's not a very good policy. Just relisting the rental ads after the contract finishes. It's a bit strange, but I guess it could happen. Other than that, I cannot think of a reason for a rental ad to be that long active. For buying, it is a lot more common. And it's not uncommon at all for properties to stay 1, 2, 3 years on the market. The market is getting a bit more fast-paced because there is a lot more buyers coming. If you checked my statistics and trends blog post recently, you will be able to understand a bit more of why I'm saying this. But the market still tends to be slow. I mean, everything in Portugal is slow. Just be prepared for that. I know that most of my clients are Americans, and in most cases, they are used to just having bidding wars over the properties and things just disappearing in weeks. It's not like that here. Just it isn't. It can happen eventually, like a really amazing deal that only stays in the market for like a few weeks to a month. But it's very unlikely. Things here are usually slow. Even the process, imagine after you already have agreed everything and signed the contract, and sometimes signing the contract is a whole other thing too. We have a lot of issues with clients because when, okay, we are buying this property and we want to do the CPCV, and that's the promise contract. It's what we call it. So the standard practice when buying is to do this promise contract, pay a down payment that it's usually 10 to 20% of the value of the purchase, and then book a deed. That's the final transaction that officiates everything and registers everything on public registry, where you make the final payment. So that's the standard of how things work. You can move directly to the deed if you manage to book the deed quite quickly, but it's always a risk because sometimes you have to wait for availability from notaries and so on. Anyway, I was saying this because signing the CPCV itself sometimes can take a lot of back and forth. For example, with these clients, I have two clients in this situation where the contract just came back and forth for like a month. Like we sent it, and then the lawyers on their end would make changes, and then we wouldn't. There was something else to change, and then it's just back and forth, back and forth. Sometimes this happens. Usually, when this happens, the property is already off the market. So at least that. The only issue is that it just takes a while. It's very common for after you just agree and you have an agreement that you will buy that property. It's very common for things to take 1 to 3 months. That's the average time. It can take more or less, but those are exceptions, not rules. So for buying a property after everything is decided, still counts on a 1 to 3 months wait period, depending on how things go. And very often it is because of bureaucracies. In this case, it was because we were waiting on a paper from Town Hall that was exactly confirming the legality of a pool. This is very uncommon in the illegal pools. And these kind of documents usually take a while. So everything in Portugal is slow. So be prepared for that. It's a very big culture clash. Let me see. I never went into it. I was going to talk about buying properties from companies. What sometimes happens is that businesses buy properties in order to pay less tax. And if they are going to use it as, or if they have some kind of real estate and rental related business, it is much, much more profitable and advantageous tax-wise to have the property under the business. So a lot of people do this. The problem is when they decide they want to sell the business and not the property, and they try to convince the buyer to buy the business and not the property. Avoid doing this. If you do decide to do this, look into the business like you were an investor. Because in a way, in the end, you will be buying the business, and it can be coming with a lot of problems like debt and taxation problems. One of the things that also happens is people doing this with offshore businesses and tax havens. Yeah, I've come across this before. People that have a business registered in a tax haven and used it to buy property in Portugal. And they now wanted to sell that business in order to sell the property. So although they advertise the property, what they were trying to do is actually to sell the business. This is a huge red flag, especially if it's in a tax haven, like avoid it at all costs. There is a special tax in Portugal for tax havens. You will be charged a 10% flat fee on taxes on pretty much everything. So the EMT costs, for example, the highest cost of EMT, it's 6%, if I'm not mistaken. And if you are buying something that is related to a tax haven, it comes down up to 10. And there is a lot of other undercharges that come associated with tax havens, because Portugal is trying to penalize this kind of situations. So definitely avoid anything related to tax havens and businesses in tax havens, because you will end up having almost guaranteedly problems with that. Let me see, I think I went over everything I wanted to talk about regarding buying property. I do want to point out once again that the most common problem when buying property is mismatched expectations and lack of due diligence. And when saying this, I mean often agents that tell the buyer that everything is possible when it's not. I will be doing a video with a rehabilitation company. We are going to record it on the 4th. And one of the things we will be discussing is renovating property. And I've seen a lot of this happening, and the owner of this company said that he experiences exactly the same. That is, people buying properties, especially foreigners buying property with the idealization of a renovation that is actually not possible to do. And the agents will often tell them, no, it's possible and you can do everything, and they will sell you a dream. And that happens a lot when the regular agencies, when showing you an older apartment, they will always try to sell you the dream. More often than not, that dream is not possible. So it's actually can be a great business. It can be a great purchase to buy something older and renovate it. I definitely recommend doing that rather than buying renovated, because often the renovations aren't done properly. However, make sure what you can do is actually possible to do, because there can be a lot of problems on that. And one of the things that my agency does very differently is actually to check all of that. So we work with a lawyer, we work with engineers, we work with architects. And I myself, I'm a property owner that has been through everything from licensing, constructions, business, tenants, renovations. I've pretty much done it all. And by combining all this knowledge, I try to make sure that our clients know exactly what they are getting into, and know if the renovations they want to do is possible, how much it will cost them, and how long it will likely take. So be very aware of these things before buying, because if you just buy the dream may not be possible. Make sure the dream is possible before you actually make the payments. So this is not exactly a fraud. Well, it is, because the person ends up being deceiving. But the problem is, you will not be able to, the only thing you will be able to do in a situation like this, where you bought a property with the intention of doing something that you found out it's not possible to do, is to sell it. There will be no legal penalization and so on. You can try and sue the sellers, but you won't get anywhere, because there won't be anything writing saying that they told you would be able to do that renovation. So that is something to be very careful with. Okay, I think I went over everything that is important to say regarding frauds and things to be aware on the Portuguese real estate market. If you do have any other questions for me, feel free to ask. I'm terrible with making time at the end to allow people to actually write them down, but I will try. I just drink my tea here. So I'm just going to recap what I've been over in this video. I've been over the things to be aware of in renting. Never make payments before contracts. Be careful with alojamentos locais and check their license. Be careful with bidding wars and pressure to make payments before contracts. Never rent before checking the property. Be aware that the conditions are often not great, and that's why it's very important to actually go to the property before you rent it. Be careful with illegal subletting. Do not pay more than 3-4 months in advance for rentals. And unregistered contracts, that is a bit of a two-sided coin. That's, if you haven't listened to that part, you can just go back to the beginning at the end of the video and check these things. On the private real estate market, on the buying and selling side of things, once again, lack of control of the market and licensing. Never make payments before you have the contract. Also, there's something here that I forgot to mention. Unlicensed agencies and agents. This is unfortunately common. Even if they're licensed, it's actually not that hard to obtain a license at all. In order to obtain a license in Portugal for real estate, all you have to do is don't have a criminal register, don't have debt, don't have an insurance, and just request it to the legal authorities. And that's about it. There is absolutely no verification of qualifications at all. And then you have, after you obtain the license, you have to do a training on desvio de fundos. How do you say that in English? So basically, illegal investments. So I can't remember the word by now. But basically, you have to do a training to make sure that your clients aren't usually using illegal money, and there's a few due diligence so that you have to do in order to check out. That's actually important in a way that most real estate agencies actually don't do this at all. But they officially do have to ask you a lot of things like what's your income, where it comes from, your official documentation, and all of that. And the objective of this is just to verify that you are a legitimate buyer and that you are not using any kind of illegal funds or illegal activity. And this should be a task for the police, but so for some reason they decided to make the real estate agencies do it. In truth, most don't do, but it is actually legal and encouraging for the real estate agencies to ask all these kind of documents to their clients in order to make this kind of verification. On your end, you should check their real estate license. Desvio de fundos, yeah, misappropriation of funds. I guess that would be the correct translation. My team just put it here. Oh, by the way, if you could, Erika, if you could check on I think I put it on our server somewhere, the link to check the alojamento locais, to check if they're legal. If you could leave it here, it would be great. I was saying to check the license of the agencies. This is also something that you can do online. One of the problems with this is that the agencies, the big agencies or any agency, can extend their license to their staff. Even me, for example, I took a license for my company, and my agents can use my license. So it is kind of hard to verify this kind of things, because people can just be using a license for a company, and then you just have to check with the company if they are actually working with them. But there is also a website where you can check the real estate license and see if they correspond. So for example, for my license, it is in the name of my company. My company is actually called Wisdom Whisper LDA Limited, and it owns the brand Savvy Cat Realty. So if you go and check our license number on this registry, it will appear as Wisdom Whisper LDA, because that's the name of the company. So it's a bit tricky to check this kind of thing. but definitely don't do dealings with people that don't have real estate license. The way I operate, because I operate as a buyer agent, it is even not required for me to have a license, which I find absolutely ridiculous. So I made a point of having a license, but it's definitely an even bigger risk to work with someone that does not have a license. So that's another thing to be aware of. Okay then, I think this time I finally covered it all. It seems virtually impossible to get a 1-year rental for this event. We've been getting a lot of them for our clients, so I wouldn't say it's impossible. It depends on the location and so on. The big problem with this is that often the clients want it a lot of time ahead. And the way that the market operates is that because there is so much offer and so little demand, 90% of the market is ready to move in. So people on the long-term market don't really want to do, let's say it's the end of January and you wanted to start your contract in April. No one will want to do that. And you will either be willing to pay these months in between, or you'll have to make a contract with something of an AL property, which is much easier if it's the low season. If it's in the high season, most don't want to do that because they make a lot more money doing touristic rentals. But it depends a lot on the location. The problem is definitely the timeline. So you have to be willing to pay a few months ahead, or you just request it for the closer to your move-in date. This actually depends on the embassy, because the official requirements for SAF is to have proof of adequate accommodation. And proof of adequate accommodation can be anything. It can be a Portuguese citizen declaring that they will house you. And in the instance of this, they do have to own a property that is suitable for housing someone. So if let's say in this case I'm living in a 3-bedroom apartment alone, so I could house someone that would occupy up to 2 bedrooms. But if a family of 3 were living in a 3-bedroom, the SAF could flag that and could not accept. So that's something to be careful with. And the proof of adequate accommodation doesn't really request a minimum time of rental. It depends a lot from embassy to embassy. On the Brazilian embassy, they only request a 3-month lease, and it can even be a hotel stay. And you can, you have, I think it's a week or 2 weeks once you come to Portugal to submit these documents. The US embassies are a lot more demanding on this. So most of my US clients, the embassy requests 6 months to a year contract. This is not the SAF requirement. This comes for the embassy itself. And I know it's the Portuguese embassy. And I cannot tell you why they operate differently. They just do. So technically, you do not have to submit this contract right away, but I'm guessing it's because there is such a big influx of applications. They are just narrowing things down further, and the more guarantees you offer, the more likely you are able to get your visa. In truth, there isn't limits of visas. So the only problem is things take a really long time, and if a lot of you probably know that it's currently a mess with SAF because the services are going to be rebranded and we are not yet sure what will come out of this. But it was supposed to happen until now, but it was postponed because of the elections happening on Sunday, and now it will only happen in March. And it will depend on who wins the election, so we don't know yet for sure what will happen with SAF. The truth is there is a huge need to growing this service, and the politicians did show interest in improving the visa process because obviously it's a big chunk of the Portuguese economy, and especially now with COVID, it's very advantageous to bring people with economic power into Portugal. So it would be obviously a smart move to facilitate visas, but we are not able to say exactly what's going to happen and how it's going to happen because everything is pending at the moment. As soon as we do have some concrete information, we will tell you, but unfortunately at the moment it's all I can tell you. Okay, so I guess this is all for today. My employee didn't find the links, but I will look for them and I will leave them in the comments. So both for checking the real estate licenses and the AL, so holiday rental licenses. So I hope this was helpful, and I don't know what we'll talk about next month, next week. It's also next month because the end month is going to end on a Monday. And I'll see you all next week. Have a great day. Bye.